The song entitled, Shut Up and Dance!
He said that I would see. He was going to Malimo right now. He set off at once. The next day he returned alone. Malimo had gone into hiding, not wanting to jeopardize her brother's chances by going to live with Kenji before Yambobo had been well and truly bound to Tafu. There was only one thing to do, so Kenji made arrangements for Yambobo to leave the next day with a suitable wedding party. They would stop overnight at Kadala's village and continue the next day to Ba'ama. At this point, an uncle of Tafu's died, and the Ba'ama villagers sent a message that the wedding was off. Tafu, however, sent word that as far as the pygmies were concerned, the death made no difference and the wedding was on. Kenji did not want to offend the villagers at this stage, so he delayed a few days, and after a respectable lapse of time, he sent the wedding party off. But not before Yambabo had yet another change of mind. As she was being rubbed with palm oil and camwood paste so that she would look her very best, she suddenly reached out for the hearth. Before anyone could stop her, she had covered herself from head to foot in ashes, the sign of deepest mourning. As the rest of the party had already been oiled and painted for some time and were anxious to be on their way, there was not much sympathy for Yambabo. They told her that if she wanted to walk through the villages like a ghost, they did not mind, but one way or another she was going. Masasi, who was acting as her father, gave her a long lecture, during which his wife hurriedly wiped the ashes and smeared on more oil. The party finally got off and had a slow and pleasant journey, stopping in each village in the hopes of receiving presents of food and palm wine. It stopped over at Kadala's, where the long-suffering family of Ngoma led the whole party lavishly. And the next day it arrived at Ba'ama. Yabambo was led through the village to the pygmies' encampment, but the villagers came hurrying after. They said the wedding could not possibly take place there soon after the death of a relative and would have to be held in the village. Tafu wandered out of his hut to see what was going on. He was dressed in a dreadful array of cast-off clothes given to him by the villagers. He did not seem particularly interested because after listening to the argument for half a minute, he yawned and went back into his hut without saying a word to anyone. We all trekked back to the village, and there, under the watchful eye of the villagers, the wedding began. Masasi had refused to come, saying the Ba'ama villagers were the worst savages of all. So Mabunya came in his place. He supervised as all the wedding gifts were placed on the ground as he watched various villagers, each in the hopes of improving his chances of getting some meat from the young couple, came forward and added either money, axe blades, or a small piece of cloth. There were already several pots, quite a number of arrows, and a few trinkets given to the party at a Kadala village. The villagers who claimed Maliamo felt that this treasure belonged to them, but Mambunya denied this strongly. He pointed out that in any case, according to their own village custom, the guests should sleep with the couple that night. Reluctantly, the villagers agreed, and Mambunya promptly scooped up the gifts and brought them into the wedding house. Tafu was supposed to put in an appearance at this point, but he could not be found. It was 2 hours before he was discovered, asleep, and dragged to the spot where we were all sitting around, eating, drinking, and singing. He arrived in his tattered village clothes, but was promptly taken inside and made to change into a new cloth, put on a woven straw hat decorated with feathers, and armed himself with a new bow and a sheath of arrows. Arrayed like this, he appeared at the doorway in the late afternoon. Yababo looked up and actually smiled. Tafu looked very handsome and imposing, if somewhat uninterested, and having made his duty appearance, he went back inside and fell asleep again. That night, the wedding party stayed at Ba'ama, all sleeping in the wedding house, feasting royally by the villagers. The next day, the rites were completed in a ceremony which consisted largely of the formal appearance of Yambabo, standing between two of her sisters, preceded by a still uninterested-looking groom. As villager after villager looked at the bride, Tafu shifted his weight listlessly from one foot to the other, scratched his back with his new arrows, and gazed longingly at some monkeys in the trees nearby. And you think I'm sexy, come on, show. The villagers warned Yabambo that she belonged to them now. She could not call on Kenji whenever she wanted help, but she would have to come to them. They pointed out which villagers she was expected to help when she and her husband came from the forest, and she was told of all the things they would expect her to do for them. She was finally reminded of the villagers that had contributed gifts for the wedding. Yababu and Tafu were led back into the house, and the others resumed their singing and dancing and drinking. Munyanga, the burly villager, had done most of the talking, who claimed to own Tafu and Maliamo, said that he wanted to wait a while according to custom, and then Maliamo with a large wedding party to Kenji's village. But to this the pygmies as one man absolutely refused. There was a great deal of argument, and it was plain that Manyunga was determined to have at least return feast arranged for him. Normally he would have arranged with Kenje's owner, but this was a wily old Kapapela, the paramount chief's brother, who had already made it known that he was in complete agreement with Kenje's refusal to have a village wedding, thus saving him the expense. So Mayunga knew his chances were slim, particularly as Kenje was no longer even at Kapapela's village and refused to go there. He finally agreed to arrange matters with Kapapela later. In the meantime, he would bring Maliamo to Kenje with a small party, but he would expect food, drink, and some kind of gift. He suggested a new hat. We agreed to come the next day, so we returned to Camp Putnan as well pleased. Mayunga arrived early the following morning with Maliamo and an escort of 3 villagers. He was clearly annoyed by the fact that only Moke and Masasi were there to greet him. Everyone else had disappeared, many of them to hunt, and others simply because they did not like Mayunga. He was even more upset when Masasi, instead of greeting him first and then the villagers, went straight to Maliamo and led her away to his hut so that she could put down her bundle and refresh herself. Kenje was nowhere to be found, and Moke invited the villagers to sit on my baraza, and they made loud remarks among themselves to the effect that I was Kenje's new owner. I should offer them beer. But I wanted to see what Kenje would do on his own, so I did nothing, although I had several containers of palm wine waiting inside the hut. Kenje was finally found engrossed in a gambling game behind Ekianga's house. He had hoped that the villagers would become discouraged and leave, but after 2 hours of patient waiting, he emerged and slowly wandered across the clearing towards us. He stopped to look inside several huts on the way, chatting to anyone he could find as though he was completely unaware that the wedding party was waiting for him. He was as slow and as surly as he could be, and when he finally reached the villagers, who by then were not even trying to disguise their anger, he just took each of their hands in turn and turned his back on them and asked me what I would like to have for lunch. This was too much for Manyunga, who stood up and shouted that he was going to take Maliamo back with him, that Kenje was a child who did not know how to behave like an adult. This touched Kenje on a very sore spot, for he prided himself on being extremely adult. He motioned Muyunga to sit down again and said, "You are only villagers. Ibanmuyama is a white man. Isn't that right? Isn't that right that I should ask him first?" I hastily said that I could wait, and without another word, Kenje went away. About half an hour later, he returned with 2 bottles of beer, some dried fish, and a bottle of palm oil. He put these on the ground beside Muyunga and then wandered out into the middle of the village, where he played with the children. The next thing I knew, he disappeared again, and I was told he had stolen one of the villagers' bicycles and gone off down the road to Kadala. The pygmies were obviously going to have nothing further to do with the villagers, and I sat sorry for Malimo, who had come and sat down beside them in the barazah. Feeling that I was in some way responsible, I asked if it was proper for me to offer them some palm wine. This eased the situation slightly. Manyunga and his friends stayed and drank their beer and palm wine, while Masasi and Moke did their best to pacify them by offering them to have a meal cooked.